At this time, I would like to move to agenda item 3, which is approval of the minutes of the December 5th, 2023 meeting. I do have one amendment that I happened to notice right at the very top where it lists what the date of the meeting. I think we accidentally had it from the last one, so I would like to amend the draft minutes to say December the 5th, 2023 at the very top. Is there any opposition to that amendment to the minutes? Seeing no opposition, that amendment is adopted. And at this time, I would move to approve the minutes as amended for the December 5th, 2023 meeting. Representative Villio is second on the motion. Any discussion? Any opposition? And without opposition, the minutes of the December 5th, 2023 meeting as amended are approved. And at this time, we would like to move to agenda item number 4, which is going to be public comments. If we have anyone here who would like to provide public comment, please come down. And if you would, I think we've got cards. Richie, can you grab that for me? Mr. Harrell, you need a... Thank you. And before we get started with our public comments, members and for the public as well, I have included in the materials that we gave out to you, as well as placed it in the folder that's accessible to the public comments that we have received. We also included the recommendations sent over by United Way of Southeast Louisiana, but we also have any public comments that were sent into the task force. We have those behind the proposal from United Way for you to view as well, and those will be included in the record. So at this time, let me throw it to the witness. And I know y'all are very experienced at this, but just remember to identify yourself, and then we'll get going. Thank you.
Good morning, members of the task force. Of course, I'm sure many of you are familiar with me by now. My name is Stephanie L. Willis. I am the policy strategist for the ACLU of Louisiana. And first, I would just like to say I'm really happy. I know this is the holiday season, so it took a lot for all of us to get here today. So I'm just glad that we're all here to, I think we all have we want the best for our community. And I know that sometimes we may have different means in getting there, but I think that we all have the same goal in mind, which is to provide safer communities for our individuals that we see every day. To be frank, originally when the task force was first, when during last session, I was actually kind of hesitant about the task force. I remember one thing that I really wanted to focus on when I came and testified during session was that we needed to focus on the data. And I'm so glad that, that was a main focal point of this task force. And one thing that I think that we all recognized is that there is a sufficient deficiency here. There is a lack of data, and that is something that we need. I think that's something that we can all agree on. And so, Rep. Bacala, I really thank you for providing that recommendation during the last task force meeting. I'm not going to belabor the point. I noted last time that this is something that the ACLU of Louisiana particularly has always strived for. We've always asked for data, and we can only move forward in the best way once we have the data that we need. I know that there are some recommendations that I probably, won't agree with. And, that's fine. That's something that we can all meet together and talk about during the legislative session. I just really want to extend my thanks and appreciation for the time that was spent in really trying to tackle the issue that we have here with crime in our state. And I think that's something that's very important. What we need to understand is that the reforms that were made really wanted to focus on making prison beds available for for violent crime, for violent offenders. And that's what we're here for today, to ensure that those who are making our communities unsafe are provided the type of, I guess, programming or held accountable for their actions, right? And so I think that one of the things that we actually did see when my colleagues and I at the ACLU of Louisiana were looking through the data, we actually did see that there was a decrease in the percentage of individuals who were incarcerated for drug offenses or nonviolent crimes. That's something that, is there. It's within the data. But yet there was an increase in the amount of individuals who were incarcerated for violent crimes. And I think that's something positive because essentially that's what we want. We want the individuals who are making our communities unsafe to be put in programs or to be put where they need to be, right? So, I don't want to take up too much time. I'll leave you with this. So it doesn't look it right now, but I was a dancer in my former life. I started dancing at the age of 2. I danced actually all throughout college and some in law school, believe it or not. And so dance was really, really important to me. And when I was in high school, as we say, we all fall short. When I was in high school, dance became so much of a priority that one of my grades slipped, okay? And so my dad was very, very strict, which I very much so appreciate. He took that away from me for a little while. And at the time, of course, I didn't understand because dance was my life. But he took it away from me so that I could make my education a priority. And he made me understand that you need to be held accountable for the rules that we have in this house. The rules that we have are that you can continue with your extracurricular activities as long as your grades are kept up. I didn't keep my end of the bargain, and so I had to be held accountable for my actions. I didn't like it at the time. I understand it now, of course, as an adult. But one thing that they did, both my parents provided me with was, although they held me accountable, of course, my punishment was taking away dance, but they ensured that I had the tools that I needed to be able to be successful in that class, and that class was chemistry. So they ensured that during study hall, I had a tutor that was provided by the school. They ensured that when I got home from school, I was, spending some extra time in chemistry. And I think that that's something that we can all relate to, those who are parents or those who have, who care for their nieces and nephews or other people that they may hold, near and dear to their hearts, that yes, children, adults, we all make mistakes, but at the end of the day, we need to be held accountable for our actions, but also we need to be provided the tools that we need to be successful in our lives. And so I think that is something that we need to focus on the back end, that yes, once people offend, in order to not have them back in the system again, we need to ensure that we're providing them with the right tools and resources so that when they are released, that they do not reoffend. Also, the last thing that I will say is that we also need to start working on the front end as well. We need to ensure that individuals are provided with the tools that they need, like I had, to be successful, so that they don't feel that they're a burden or that no one cares about them. Because essentially that's what happens. People feel that they don't care, so they're going to actually do the same thing over and over again. I thank you all for your time today. I really appreciate the report. I thank you for the recommendations. And I look forward to seeing you all during the 2024 session, which is coming up pretty soon. So thank you all.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman, members. My name is Will Harrell, as you know, but some of you may not know I'm here on behalf of the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Department. And I have some comments to make on the report. It's weird that public comment is happening now, and my comments pertain to the draft report and to the general deliberations of this body, and hopefully y'all will take it into consideration out of order. But first, I want to observe in this report and the various comments made throughout this process that we could not agree more that programming is essential, and that what has been referred to as a revolving door needs to be addressed. The good news, as some of you already know, the Louisiana Sheriff's Association, through a resolution this body passed, has undertaken a review of basic jail guidelines. The University of Texas issued this report comparing basic jail guidelines of the state of Louisiana to 6 other states, the American Bar Association, American Corrections Association, and United Nations standards on jail and conditions of confinement. And the Sheriff's Association is undertaking a review. And a lot of the recommendations in this report that the Sheriff's Department will be to enhance programming so that when people are locked up, that they are actually getting something useful that will help them get on with their lives and not return over and over again. But in order to enhance the standards and the programming offered to people incarcerated in the jails across the state, resources are necessary, and that it is true now that I can say I've been on the inside that there are things that sheriffs and sheriff's deputies would like to do, and they know better than anyone what needs to happen. But when the resources aren't made available to them to provide these programming, it's just not going to happen. No matter what we wish or say in these hearings, if the resources don't follow our intentions, nothing will change. I have heard some conversations about whether what's happening with the 2017 Justin Reinvestment Initiative savings that are supposed to be reinvested to prevent crime and to provide for public safety. Perhaps that the body should look at those resources as a means to supplement the per diems and other resources provided to our jails and sheriffs around the state. But I have to also say that any effort to repeal JRI provisions from the 2017 will subsequently diminish those funds available. So as you deliberate proposals that may repeal, please consider that will be counterproductive to the goals of providing enhanced, meaningful programming for people currently incarcerated. I would also say, in comments made here in last session, the session before, and in this draft report, that in a rush to put more youthful people into the adult system has serious implications for jail administration. Young people, not even juveniles, but young people are harder to manage in a jail setting or in prison setting because these environments were never designed for them. It also creates a tremendous strain on already challenging understaffing predicament that every jail in this state finds itself in, because federal requirements are that youthful offenders, people of the age under 18, must be separated, regardless of the crime they committed, must be separated by sight and sound from people 18 or over. This creates classification issues. You can't house under these statutes, and certainly under the Prison Rape Elimination Act, you have to house juveniles and youthful people separate from adults. That's very hard to do given the configurations of most of our jails around the state. So as you go forward and deliberate this, please do keep into account the impacts that will have on administration of local jails. We are very pleased to see the acknowledgement and recommendations that some provision be made to address chronic understaffing that not only we see in Orleans Parish, but every parish around this state. Certainly we see that in the juvenile system. Provisions should be made to make the position jobs more attractive. That means more resources. And I hope that you will carry through and consider that as you go through the appropriations process. But there's not only one way to address understaffing or inadequate, unconstitutional staff to resident ratios. One way is to reduce your population. Are there people being held in our jails who shouldn't be there in the first place? Are they being held too long because the criminal process takes too long? Let's look at those things. And then but additionally, I think more resources will need to be available to make these jobs competitive in a market. And finally, I will say that many comments have been made in this room, as well as a task force that is being chaired by Representative Schlegel. We have a serious issue with how we treat mental illness in our communities. And we do recognize, we're glad to see that there's some acknowledgement in the draft report and that proposals will be made. But in drafting those proposals, it clearly is going to be important to consider more resources going to our jails to provide support for people with serious or minimal mental health needs. But we also know from the research from many years that jail is the least appropriate place for some people, depending on their diagnosis. So the thought of only treating people who commit crimes due to their mental illness in jail is not the answer in many of these cases. With that, I have nothing further. Thank you for hearing me. And if anybody would like a copy of this report, I can make it available. It should have been circulated. I brought a hard copy for you, Representative Bacala. I'd love to hear your comments on this. I know you have a lot of experience with actually jail management. Thank you.
All right, thank you all. And Representative Bacala, we've got you for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought you were with Jefferson last week.
No, sir. They wouldn't have me.
Well, I'm going to take advantage of you representing Orleans Parish, if you don't mind. And by the way, I see you have some guests today.
Excuse me?
Your
Yeah, Ezra. You come up here. You're being asked.
Well, welcome to the Capitol. Any comments? Okay. We talk about data, and I think one of the most disturbing pieces of data that I have seen in a long, long time, maybe in my entire life in criminal justice, is the arrest data for Orleans Parish. I note from Orleans' own website that in 2010, they made 42,569 arrests. 42,569. In 2023, that number had dropped to 7,288. I'll repeat again, 42,569 arrests in 2010, dropping to 7,288 in 2023. I just don't get it. I mean, when arrests are plunging and crime is rising, I think you have to make the correlation that when there's no consequence, if your parents hadn't say no more dancing until you get your chemistry right, the same thing I see for Orleans. We know it's out of hand. And I look at this data and I'd say, is anybody surprised? You know, and look, I think the DA's office has gotten much better, but when they went from 70 jury trials a year, 6 or 7 pre-pandemic, and they were down to 4 jury trials per year. Now they're back up again, all right, but we're still suffering the consequence. So do you have any comment on why Orleans has gone in the tank on enforcement of the law in regards to arrests?
Is that 42,000 plus arrest or?
This says people arrested per year. It's on the Orleans Parish dashboard.
Okay.
It's the dashboard that you guys put up in Orleans Parish. I will say again, and I'll call attention. You know, we talk about people languishing in jail, waiting on trials. Mm-hmm. It's the data that we don't collect. I did forward to this committee that 39, maybe plus states. It just says in the report 39 states have adopted standards for timeliness of adjudication. It's called the model standards for state trial courts, and it was put out by the National Center for State Courts. It calls for the adjudication, I think, of 98% of all cases, felony cases, within 12 months. I bet we don't hit 98% in 6 years. You know, so but I don't know that because we don't have the data. All right, and I do believe that if you had been told, listen, if you don't get your chemistry right in 4 years, you can't dance anymore, you wouldn't have paid too much attention to it. But I think that's where we're at. So I'll go silent for a moment and wait for your comments, if you don't mind.
I'll first say that if my dancing for me depended on chemistry, I'd never dance a day in my life, and that might be not such a bad thing. I can't. I'm at the sheriff's department, as you know, in Orleans. The sheriff does not patrol, so I can't address that the drop in arrest. But I will say, even with that drop, even with that, I can't imagine what the jail would do with 42,000 people currently, given the staffing scenarios that we're facing. With 7,200 is beyond the current capacity to, I believe, adequately staff. We're working on that, but and I can't speak for the NOPD, but they've got a tremendous rate of overturn and understaffing challenges as well. This is a serious problem that anyone in law enforcement will tell you anywhere in any system, police and sheriffs, jails alike.
Well, I know the challenges. Okay, I understand that, but this committee's about collecting information about how we address violent crimes, and I think it obvious to me that an issue we have, at least in Orleans Parish, a contributing factor is probably a lack of arrests. Now, we're here to identify what the issues could be, probably are, and then try to figure out solutions as well. But I think if we don't at least start the game by saying it's got to be a contributing factor whenever the laws aren't being enforced, when crimes up and arrests are down by eightfold.
I'd need to know a lot more about the data, but a lot of things have happened since 2010. For example, how we police victimless crimes, marijuana, all these things. There's not a lot less, if any, marijuana arrest. I'm sure of that. And I don't know if that will account, that can't possibly account for such a dramatic rise. But I'd need to know what the arrests in 2010 were for as opposed to 2023. And that might explain some of it, but certainly not all of it.
I think I'd also like to add that the arrests may have been more, but I would have liked to know how many individuals were actually charged as well. Because we have arrests, but then we also know that there's also the prosecutorial process, and whether or not individuals were actually charged for the offenses that they were arrested for, I think also makes is a contributing, not a contributing factor, but something that should also be considered. So I see what you're talking about here, that the arrests, I believe you said in 2010, were, I think it's 42,569, and that is actually a high figure. I was actually working at the DA's office in New Orleans at that time. And just to piggyback off of what Will said, there was a high increase in marijuana crimes at that time, or marijuana offenses. I think there was also.
Well, let me give you a different number, if you
Yes,
don't mind. Well, let's just go back to felonies. All right. So we're going to forget all these little misdemeanor cases that we could talk about. With the felony numbers in 2010, there were 22,603 felony arrests. This is people, all right, not charges. 22,603 individuals were arrested for felony crimes in Orleans Parish. That number has dropped last year to 4,146 people arrested for felony charges in Orleans, according to their dashboard. Now, you can do your quick math, but it looks like we're making about probably less than 20% of the number of arrests. And how do you not associate that with a crime issue, that the crime wave going on? How do you not associate those two? And let's identify, until we get law enforcement back on track, we can talk about why they're not. I don't know.
I think we also need to consider whether or not those felonies were violent or nonviolent crimes. I mean, there are.
I recognize violent crimes, and they have numbers on that too. They can tell you the murder data is the most obvious, but. Look, when somebody breaks into my car down there, I don't think it's inconsequential. If I live down there and somebody breaks into those are all nonviolent crimes. But I don't think we can say, okay, if it's not a violent crime, who cares? I
That's not what I'm saying.
The victim. I know you're not.
Yeah.
I just want to make the point, and I don't want to belabor any of this. But I think it's you can't not say there's a real problem in Orleans. I bet there's no other parish in the state that would say we've seen an 80% drop in arrests when crime is going up. And how do you not care about that? No matter if you live in Wynn Parish or Bogalusa or Shreveport, how does that not disturb anybody in this state? And you wonder why, when you talk to folks, they don't want to come here anymore. New Orleans was the destination people came to. You wonder why businesses are leaving. I mean, I think the trickle-down effect, the ripples are devastating, and we need to fix it. And we need to start looking at what's happening and why it's happening. Why is the next point, but the what is very disturbing. I'll leave it with that unless y'all want to comment. I'm going to turn off my microphone if anybody else wants to comment.
I will. Sometimes a drop in arrest doesn't indicate necessarily a bad thing. Maybe the police are shifting their focus and priorities away from the easy stuff that doesn't do as much damage and focus on the harder things to investigate and to prosecute the serious violence offense. That could be one explanation. I really just don't have a good answer, but I think that's a very good question.
I'm going to just repeat what I said before. I think, with all due respect, Representative Bacala, I think that yes, those figures are alarming. I'm not going to dispute that fact. However, I think that there's more that we also need to take into consideration. I think just stating the numbers as, the figures that you presented regarding felony arrests, the figures that you presented regarding the amount of arrests back in 2010, I think that there's more that we need to actually look into. I think that we need to actually determine whether or not the arrests were actually prosecuted. There was a period of time in which individuals were arrested quite frequently. And it didn't necessarily mean that because they were arrested that they were actually charged for the offense that they were arrested for. So I think that that's something that we really need to look at, not only in Orleans Parish, but throughout our state. I know Orleans Parish has been a significant, focal point. A lot of people come here as tourists. A lot of people come here from all around go to New Orleans from all around the state of Louisiana because it's New Orleans. Who wouldn't want to come? And I do also believe that.
You don't want to come.
Oh, he doesn't want to come. Well, I mean, that's fair. That's fine. But I mean, there are a lot of people who do. I mean, we see that with tourists. I mean, people are still coming to New Orleans. I mean, and it maybe for some people, it may not be for others, and that's fine. But I think that if we want to talk about data, let's talk about all of it. Not just, the and I don't want to call it general because it is data, but not just saying or stating that it's felony arrests. What kind of felony arrests were there? Felony arrests, misdemeanors. I mean, I wish that we all lived in a world where that didn't happen. I think that we all do. But it's the fact that we need to actually consider what it actually is, not just throw out the general term. I think we need to go through the process. And Rep. Bakala, I completely agree with you with regards to speeding up the prosecutorial process. I'm all about that. We tried to do that before. Baton Rouge tried to do that as well. And so if we are all in a place where we want to come to some kind of resolution, it just seems to me that our ideas weren't so far-fetched to begin with. The ACLU of Louisiana tried to bring forth our jail data bill. It didn't work. Okay, if it's working this time, we want data, we're all for it. We want to move forward with the prosecutorial process, we're all for it. Because I agree with you. You made a statement during the last task force meeting that there could be an individual, I think you said 5 years, who's waiting for his case to be prosecuted for 5 years. He may be out on bond and actually is doing very well with his life, and then may have to come back, and then all of the great things that he may have done is now out the window, right? I agree with you. I think that we all just have to come to the fact that we may agree on more things than we disagree on. And so what it comes down to is how can we all move forward with having some kind of a resolution. And I think that that's something that we need to discuss, as we say, during legislation before it gets to the floor. There are a lot of bills that come through our committees, and it's like, you know what, let's pass it through this committee, but we're going to talk about it more before it gets on the floor. And let's do that. Let's talk about it before it gets on the floor. Let's come to some kind of resolution. But let's do that with all of the information that we have, not just the general data.
All right, thank you. We also have, let's see, who is that? Mr. Lambert.
That you got me. Thank you, Mr. Harris. I'm glad to see you come over to our side working with law enforcement. You spoke about retention and law enforcement officers, so I just got some quick questions for you. I hope you do recognize that one of the recommendations of this task force deals with the retention and being able to hire more officers to protect the streets. So just in short, do you believe poor pay is affecting the officers in the state of Louisiana? Poor police pay.
Your mic's not on. Your mic's not on.
Yes, I agree. Definitely. The pay, pensions, other benefits.
What about poor leadership in command and elected officials?
That could be the case.
You think when your sheriff spends $18,000 on hotel rooms for Mardi Gras, it affected the morale of her department?
Yeah, apparently it has.
What about the effects of JRI? You think that has an effect on the officer wanting to serve in a capacity of a police officer with the effects of JRI?
I've had discussions with police officers, and I definitely can't speak for the
Let me give you an example.
law enforcement community, but many people that I know, especially, and again, I'm not NOPD or in patrol law enforcement. It's I deal with people who manage the jail. And in those cases, they know many cases, some have been there a long time, some who are new, that there are just people who are in there who really shouldn't be, and it makes their job harder. And they don't think, they wish that in many cases, especially nonviolent, like marijuana arrests, all this stuff, my sense is that a lot of people, especially those with more experience, realize that the more people who should be handled in other ways but are stuck in their jails makes their job harder, because if you don't have adequate levels of staffing, the ratios aren't right, it's hard to provide for programming. It's hard to bring programming in, because programming takes people off the post to manage to get people into handle in a room off-site for a program to be conducted. That's harder and impossible to do when you can't adequately post a pod. And they know as a result that if the inmate, the population goes without programming, activities, stimulation, there's going to be problems that they're going to have to deal with on their day job.
So I think you're referring to things that are happening inside a facility, but let's talk about outside. It's become increasingly more difficult for probation officers to revoke people who've been out on probation. In particular, you spoke about marijuana. With multiple positive tests, and we're not revoking them and putting them back and paying the consequences for those issues. You believe that's causing morale issues with our probation and parole officers?
Actually, interesting that you said that, because I haven't really been able to dig down into this lately, but one of the drivers lately, at least in Orleans Parish, and I'm sure in other places, has been a dramatic increase in revocations. So that's happening.
Here's an initiative that you supported 2 years ago, the pursuit to remove police qualified immunity. You think that has an effect on the officer wanting to stay in his profession?
It does, and I believe a lot of that is driven by misinformation. The way, and again, I'm not an expert on, that's more of a policing issue, but it does obviously affect jailers. But qualified immunity isn't a 100%, it's not, it doesn't mean that a reasonable officer's behavior will not be acknowledged. I mean, you have to be, it's got to be pretty outrageous to be sanctionable.
No, and I absolutely agree. I think my point is that we can, for once, you and I agree. We have an issue with the retention of law enforcement officer. And if we want to fix that problem, you got to come and listen to the concerns that officers are having.
I agree,
the
100%.
pursuit to go after qualified immunity, poor command, not the ability. When JRI, we misclassifying people as we released them from prison. They were serving on a nonviolent offense. Right? That's what they're sentenced to. But their prior criminal history has multiple violent offenses. But then we let them out and say they're not nonviolent, and we hand them to probation and parole to deal with them, and we tied their hands on their ability to revoke their probation. So these issues have to be addressed. If we're going to help law enforcement professionals, we have to give them an environment where they can be successful, and it's not a revolving door where we're dealing with the same people over and over. We're moving into a situation where we're dealing with second and third and fourth generation of these parents, these children in the same family. So if we're going to help law enforcement, that's the start. So I appreciate you certainly speaking up for the law enforcement professionals in this moment. Thank you.
And I want to add that one thing that would benefit is training, and not just training in the regular, like how to put out a fire training, but training how to manage, training how to become a leader, all of these things. But that, again, takes resources. And a lot of these departments, number one, don't have the resources to provide adequate, sophisticated, nuanced training modules. But when you provide training, you're pulling somebody off the post. So if you're understaffed in the first place, you're going to have to minimize your training because you just can't afford to have people off duty. Well, they're on duty, but off post in a training module. So that, again, is we need to look at who's there, who shouldn't be, how do we reduce the numbers, and then how do we attract more people to the profession and keep them. Retention is critical. That's also a problem sheriff departments face. A lot of people come in, go through 90 hours of training, are now for the first time able to walk onto a pod, and they decide not to stay. There's got to be things to support those people and to retain those people, because that's almost a waste of resources. Lots invested in people who don't stick around. So you got to make it worthwhile for people to stick around to justify that front end investment. And the training has to be ongoing. And that's something that I hope this committee will consider also in making their recommendations.
I just want to add to a point. I'm all for programs in jails, but the problem is it's very difficult. We need to make sure that we recognize that with the pretrial, they're in and out. I mean, they're most of them probably come in and 3 days later they're bonded out. Or 4 days. Well, I'm getting a nod of the head the other direction, but it's a little more difficult when you don't know if somebody's going to be able to complete a 30-day program because they may be in, they may be out. So with those who are serving sentences, it's an easier population to serve than the pretrial.
In most cases, there is in and out, and that's the way it's supposed to be. That's what jails are for. But I had a conversation with a woman just last week who's been sitting in Orleans Parish Jail for 4 years. There's a guy that's been there 4, 5, 6 years. And that's not the majority, but there's a substantial group of people like that. Many of them are waiting for their DOC transfer. They want to get on with it so they can start their programs so that they can eventually, get out and be successful.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we reference something about pretrial being different than post-adjudication. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you all, and thank you, Ms. Willis and Mr. Harrell. And if you could get
I didn't
I'm
see-
sorry. Hold on one second. We got Remy's mic never works. Let's see. There you go.
Am I on now? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I would like to thank both of y'all for being here. Ms. Willis, I think you raised a couple of things that we all can agree with. And one is that data collection is a glaring problem that we have in our criminal justice system. And we need to figure out the way to properly do that. I think it's vital that we all have the ability to collect accurate data so everybody can use it. So I do think we agree with that, and I do see that as a recommendation of the task force. The other thing that, in terms of recommendations of the task force that I'm pleased about is the focus on rehabilitative services. And Will mentioned this, Mr. Harrell mentioned this, about mental health services. And I think that focusing on mental health services is the right way to go. When I say focus, I mean resources and structurally. And I appreciate your anecdote about your life, Ms. Willis, but that type of consequences for action or misaction only works when you have rational people who are with their full faculties and can make cost-benefit analysis type decisions. People who are suffering from substance abuse addiction, mental health, or behavior disorders who are not being appropriately treated do not make those decisions to say, I want to get this reward back,
Right.
so let me address the what I'm falling short of. So we need to address the mental health, behavior, and substance abuse on the front end, and we can get to a point where more people are ever able to make those responsible decisions.
I agree. Thank you so much, Mr. Starnes, and it was great seeing you last week at the procrastinator CLE, because I'm a procrastinator in getting my CLEs. But yeah, it was very nice seeing you last week, and I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm really happy that Representative Muscarello made that recommendation, and I look forward to working with you in the 2024 session regarding hopefully it becomes a bill. Because I think that it's something that's definitely needed, and hopefully we'll also be able to, like you said, work on that on the front end instead of having to deal with it on the back end, getting less people into the system on the front end. So I completely agree. Thank you.
And the final thing is recruitment and retention of law enforcement officers. I agree is important, but also in the public defender system, we have recruitment and retention issues there as well.
Absolutely.
And if you're talking about prosecuting more people, we represent about 88% of all people accused of crimes in Louisiana. So just remember, there's got to be a public defender component there anytime you're talking about more people in court. So, but thank you very much.
That also attributes to the lack of resources to public defenders, most definitely contributes to the length of stay. People who should be in and out waiting for the actual trial, if they can't get to that, then you're going to delay the time someone spends in the jail, which has implications for staffing and programming and all of this. Thank you.
All right, thank you both.
And I think we'll move on to our next two witnesses who would like to speak. Oh, and Mr. Will. Will. Okay. And y'all can come up in any order that you'd like. I have 3 cards here. Let's see, with Miss Lynn Stevens and Miss Patricia Williams from Goodwill Industries. I'm having trouble with these names. And Miss Sally Black from the Louisiana Women's Action Committee. And I want to say it's a Joseph, but I can't tell the last name. Okay, and if y'all would, just please introduce yourself before you begin, and y'all can
Sure.
start in any order.
Good morning. My name is Joseph Rosenzweig. I'm here with the Louisiana Workers' Councils. I'd like to start by saying that unlike many of the corporations, the oil companies, the insurance companies that pay for many of your campaigns, or else pay for steak dinners as part of their lobbying campaigns, I pay taxes. And I object that so much of the money that the value that I produce at work, the hard work that I do as a logistics worker, goes to pay for the elaborate smokescreen that calls itself the Louisiana Violent Crime Task Force. I say smokescreen because my purpose in speaking here before the public today is to point out that the goals of this committee have nothing to do with protecting the safety of the public and everything to do with impoverishing working-class Louisianans in order to guarantee big profits for the aforementioned benefactors, the aforementioned donors to your campaign funds, the aforementioned lobbyists who wine and dine you in the evenings. It's no mystery what causes crime. Study after study show that poverty, racist exclusion, forced inequality, these are the factors that create the conditions that drive people to desperation. Louisiana, for year after year, ranks as one of the most, if not the most, poorest state in the country, the most unequal state in the country, with some of the worst health outcomes in the country, including some of the worst health outcomes in the developed world. This particularly affects our black brothers and sisters. The rate of, for example, maternal mortality is abysmal and should be a shame to any country, any government in the world. In face of these conditions, the answer of the state, again, year after year, has been to lock people up at rates that would put to shame the cruelest dictatorships in the history of humanity. This has earned Louisiana the hideous title as prison capital of the world. So let me repeat that, prison capital of the world. What's being proposed by this body, the so-called Louisiana Violent Crime Task Force? We'll find out, presumably, when you make your presentations after public comment, that we need more cops, that we need more jails, that we need longer sentences, in total, that we need more people to be put in cages across the state of Louisiana, whether that's in Department of Correction custody, in jails, in youth prisons, detention centers, etc. the question that we have to ask ourselves, or rather that I implore my fellow working class Louisianans to ask themselves, is why? If we had maybe one of the 28,000 people that are in DOC custody currently, or one of the many thousands more that are under state supervision, or the thousands more that are languishing pretrial in sheriff jails across the state, we might get a ready answer. In fact, if we asked maybe one of the men or women who clean this building, or maybe one of the men or women who serve you in the cafeteria, we might get a more ready answer. And I think that they would be willing to volunteer quite readily that it's a matter of cheap labor, and that everything that you do is to drive the price of labor to an absolute minimum, which of course in jails, prisons, and detention centers across the state is cents on the dollar, if not nothing. Bacala, Representative Bacala, you, for example, sponsored legislation that restricts people's access to Medicaid, that increases the premiums that poor families pay to access services through the CHIP program. This is all to crush workers, to drive the cost of labor for the big oil and gas corporations, the big retail associations, the manufacturer groups, to an absolute minimum, because that's who you work for. I'll conclude by bringing your attention to a recent lawsuit that was taken out against the state of Louisiana, of Alabama, which has a prison system not unlike Louisiana's. I think that there are more people incarcerated per capita in Louisiana, but the system operates in much the same way. The plaintiffs in this suit include incarcerated workers and unions such as the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Workers Union and the Union of Southern Service Workers. And I think this is notable. They allege that incarcerated workers have produced something on the order of $450 million worth of free labor, either to the state of Alabama or to private corporations that contract with the state through a convict leasing system. And they correctly charged Alabama officials, including Kay Ivey on down through members of DOC, with labor trafficking. And I think that that is also correct. I think what is noteworthy is that our brothers and sisters in the labor movement are getting hip to this criminal scheme to impoverish the people, to drive down the cost of labor to an absolute minimum, to make it difficult for people to operate. And these are the conditions that produce crime. It truly is a crime, a historic crime, a crime of historic proportions, that maternal mortality rates are what they are in this state. That child poverty is what it is in this state. Something in the order of 1 in 5 children are what they call hunger insecure, a horrible euphemism for children that go hungry at night. So this is what is going on, and I think this is the unspoken thing that needs to be said. And I want to alert you, but first and foremost, the workers of Louisiana, that we need to start speaking plainly about the problems that we face. And we need to start organizing so that we can finally do away with this criminal system of mass incarceration, which you are rushing to prop up, to increase, bemoaning the loss of labor, bemoaning the loss of bodies to fill these cages all across the country. And we say that we're against this, and we're organizing to change the situation.
All right, thank you so much for your comments. You go ahead, just make sure you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Sally Jane Black. I'm with the Louisiana Women's Action Committee. I confess that until a few days ago, I didn't know that the Louisiana Violent Crime Task Force existed, but once I learned of it, I felt compelled to look into it. As a woman in Louisiana, one of the biggest violent crimes that I'm concerned with is domestic violence. There is an epidemic of domestic violence, of violence against women in this state. And I was appalled when I looked up who was on this task force, because the majority of it is law enforcement or people with ties to law enforcement. And as somebody who advocates for the rights of women, advocates for a better world for women, I am well aware that the last people who are there to help victims of domestic violence are the police. I can certainly cite the statistic that is well known that 40% of police officers in the United States have a history of domestic violence. So putting law enforcement on a task force to fight violent crime, which should include domestic violence, that's the fox guarding the henhouse. But add to that just anecdotal evidence. I can cite my personal friend who was a victim of domestic violence so severe she suffered brain damage. And afterward, when she tried to get a restraining order, which was a trial all its own, part of that was that the courts required that the man who had abused her would have his guns taken away, but instead the police simply brought them right back to him, brought those guns right back to him. She lived in fear for her life, and she's lucky to have survived, as most women who escape domestic violence do end up being killed. On the flip side of that, most women who stand up to domestic violence, who stand up for themselves, who fight back, those women end up in prison. Those women get charged with violent crimes. It's horrifying that you take this, it's easier to go to jail for standing up for yourself as a woman than it is if you're abusing a woman. The same thing can be said for rape statistics. It's easier to go to jail for fighting back against your rapist than it is if you are a rapist. This isn't a matter of needing more training or more money for the police or higher arrest rates. The problem are the police in this situation. The problem is the system in this situation. It is designed to terrorize women. That was made abundantly clear when many of you who are here voted to criminalize abortion a few years ago. The whole point of criminalizing abortion isn't to preserve life, as many of you claim, but instead to force women into situations where they are financially dependent on men, where they are unable to free themselves from these circumstances, to make sure that women are desperate and afraid and therefore must turn to whatever resources they can, which would include jobs that pay the lowest. And that's very clear in this state where the wage gap between men and women is so wide, especially between Black women and Latina women who make less than half of what white men do. And it's abundantly clear that you're not interested in addressing this situation, because instead of putting forth programs, instead of putting forth bills that would help women become more independent and not have to suffer at the hands of violent men, instead of putting forth programs that would help women in these circumstances, or to generally help women or workers in this state to reduce the conditions that Joseph pointed out, the vast poverty and other problems that we're facing, the rising rents, the rising insurance rates, everything that traps us. You've put forth bills to fund more prisons and put forth bills to fund more police, to make it harder for people to access programs that they need. This committee is a complete fraud. Y'all aren't here to help anyone with preventing violent crime. You're here to ensure it. And I could not sit back and not come here and have that said, because when I learned of this committee, as I said, I was truly appalled to learn who was on it. That's all I have to say.
Thank you both for your comments.
I would only have one more card, but it's got two names on it, Lynn Stevens and Patricia Williams.
Appreciate your help. Good morning. My name is Lynn Stevens. I am the Director of Workforce Development for Goodwill Industries of North Louisiana. So we're one of 4 Goodwills in the state of Louisiana, and so we represent 26 northern parishes. Sorry, we're here on the very last day. We are a CIG grantee and have been since day one. So we were a Tier 1 and a Tier 2 funded agency. We did provide a handout, and I know each of you got that handout. I know you were looking for some data and some outputs and some information, and we tried to include as much as we could in there. I would like to introduce Patricia Williams. She is actually my exit program manager and has been since day one. She's the regional reentry manager and also a formerly incarcerated individual. So she brings her heart and the passion into this. So I'd like her to talk a little bit about the program, and then I'd like to just reiterate a few facts and answer any questions for you guys.
Good morning. As Lynn said, my name is Pat Williams. I'm the Regional Reentry Manager for the 318 Reentry Programs. We are a CIG grant. We cover the parishes of Caddo, Bossier, Ouachita, Rapides, and those surrounding parishes. We provide services for the moderate to high risk individuals, men and women who are coming out of prison, who also identify as having moderate to high needs. We use the Tiger assessment tool to make eligibility. We receive many of our referrals from Department of Corrections, but because of our longstanding Exit 318 program in the community, we also get a lot of referrals from the prisons themselves, their case managers, their transition specialists, and their discharge planners. The program is not biased against any offense. We serve men and women who have sex offense charges, violent charges, and domestic violence, substance abuse. We just don't pick and choose. We don't work with first offenders because the goal is to reduce the number of people who return to prison. The people that we get that are the violent offenders, they have traditionally done decades in prison. For example, just recently, a man came out who had done 40 years in prison. He's 70 years old. His acclimation back to the community has been very difficult because the world no longer resembles what it looked like 40 years ago. He has had difficulty in learning how to ride the bus. He has heart conditions, getting to the hospital. He wants to work. But the frustration of being on the outside, getting the ID, getting Medicaid, getting SNAP benefits, learning to function in this new world, he made the comment, I think I just want to go back to prison. It's easier, which is understandable, but it's also sad. And reentry programs like the 318 provide those resources. We partner with Easter Seals, who does the case management piece of it, which ensures that they have Medicaid, SNAP benefits if they don't release from prison with that. We also provide the linkages to mental health, substance abuse, physical health, and oftentimes our participants don't even know how to navigate those systems, how to get on Medicaid, how to get on SNAP benefits, because they've been gone too long, or their literacy level is at below 3rd grade. So that there are so many resources that they need when they come out. The other thing I'd like to just comment on is what it looks like when someone's releasing from prison, especially if they've done a lot of time. They may come to Shreveport, Bossier, Monroe, or Alexandria by bus. We have a transition specialist, a peer support specialist that meets them at the bus station. We make sure that they get to the residence that they're going to. We also make sure that they get to the parole office. Our 318 team would not be successful as it is without parole involvement. So each one of our participants is assigned a specific parole officer in the parole district. For example, in Caddo Bossier Parish, it's Officer Julie Elkins. For men and women with sex offenses is Officer Kathy Reedy, and the same is duplicated in Monroe and Rapides Parish, which always gives us up-to-date notice on who may be arrested, who tested positive for drugs in a random drug testing. If that happens, we ensure that they get to intensive outpatient treatment or they do inpatient treatment. They also have to worry about finding a place to live. Because everyone now, housing authorities, they're going to do a background check along with a credit check. They haven't been employed for 2 years. They have a background, and they're going to get denied housing. So that's where we come in, and we have transitional houses within all the parishes that we work with that helps house our people, along with sex offender housing in each of those parishes. The goal is that we help them get employed at a livable wage. Sometimes even Goodwill hires them until we can find them a more livable wage, and again, they get something on their resume. So they have to look at that. The homes that we provide also come fully furnished. Living rooms, bedrooms, a TV, an internet. The internet's really important so they can do employment searches. If they need to do telehealth, it's there to do the job searching for them. Also, the washer and the dryer is there. One of the reasons for that is because they have to ride the bus for the most part wherever they go. Trying to carry a load of laundry to the washateria on a bicycle or by foot or in inclement weather is really difficult. It's not like it's basic necessities like Maslow's hierarchy is that you talk about when someone's basic needs are met, then they start to feel a little bit better. We don't want to put them in homes that slumlords are managing because when someone comes out of prison, that's what they're leaving. We want to give them the opportunity to see that they can do something different so that they can be different, not learn or be better. We always hear, oh, we want you to be better. But in order to be better, you have to learn to do something different in your life. Are we successful all the time? We're not. But for the times that we are successful, it makes it all worth it. And reentry programs like this wasn't here when I came home 12 years ago. There wasn't Medicaid opportunities. Doors, my crimes were financial crimes, so no one wants to hire a thief, and I get that. But I couldn't work at McDonald's. I couldn't do inventory work. I was educated. My oldest crime is 20 years. 20 years old. I couldn't even get approved for an apartment. And I had been home 5 or 6 years, sit on boards in my community, have character witness, but yet my criminal record stays with me forever. I think there are places for prison. I don't think prisons need to go away because violent offenders, some need to be there. There are consequences. Do I believe in forgiveness? Of course I do. But forgiveness also doesn't mean it erases consequences. We all have consequences for our poor choices. So we partner with United Way of Northwest Louisiana, and with their Shreveport, their Financial Empowerment Center. We had one young lady come out. She did 20 plus years, a woman with sex offense charges, so where she can live is very limited. So what the Financial Empowerment Center did for her is got her on an 18-month track to own her own home. She's been home less than 8 months, began working right away, and has already saved close to $20,000 because she has a goal. People need second chances, and sometimes third and fourth and fifth. But they don't always get that from families. Sometimes families can be your harshest critic because they're impacted by the pain that person may have caused their family. Reentry programs are not impacted by that. We want to work with them when they come home. We're not interested in sentencing guidelines, early releases, any of that. What we want to be able to do and continue to do is work with men and women who are coming home, who have been in and out of the system. When I was locked up, they called it life on the installment plan. is to stop that. To let them know that instead of hearing all negative stuff their whole life, this is what you can't do, this is who you can't be because of where you come from, where your background is, whether it's race. Reentry programs and case managers is here to feed them the positive, to help show them what they can do and who they can be, with just a little bit of an encouragement. Lynn?
So our hope is that you continue to fund programming outside of the jails and community incentive grants. We do agree with the United Way of Southeast Louisiana. Data is important. We track a lot of data, outputs and outcomes, is to the best of our ability. Our program is only 6 months. Honestly, that's not long enough. We start in-reach at about 60 days prior to release, working with these individuals. That's what makes a difference. It's the relationship you build, so you know how that choice is going to change along those 60 days prior to release. So that only gives us 4 months once they're out. They're not stable. If you look at best practices across the country and the wording, it's about 9 months. After that, you start enabling them. So it really needs to be longer. We have been restricted by DOC. They've given us funding guidelines and the number of individuals. So we couldn't do more. We've done as much as we possibly can. We could do a lot more. We get calls every day. We've actually had calls sitting here while we were here in the lobby and sitting waiting to testify to y'all today. People wanting to get into the program from all over the state. We just want you to get the information you need and be able to express to us that there are programs out there that they funded may not be the best programs. But there are great programs out there like ours that really need to stick around because we are changing lives.
All right, Mr. Lampert for a question.
Hi, thank you for coming. Thank you for what you do. And thank you for sending candidly what I think has been probably the most granular data we've received since we started asking for data about what the programs are doing, what are the successes and failures, and how can it be better and worse. As far as the management of your program, you started in 2019, you finished a grant cycle in 2022, and you're starting a new one that goes through 2025. Am I correct in that assessment? And so it looks to me like you had 252 participants that actually completed the entire 6 months of your program, and that came at a cost of what you said is $2.87 million. Is that right? $2,869,000.
Yeah, the 252 doesn't include the people that are still continuing in the program. So that 6 months kind of rotates every month. We're rolling people off, rolling people on.
But the numbers that you gave us had a start date and an end date. So I understand what you're saying, that it's kind of a concentric circle.
Right.
So, and I'm not being critical at all. I'm not,
Right.
but that comes at a cost of about $12,000 annually per person to successfully get them through the program.
To
Am I
successfully,
correct?
yes.
Okay. All right. That's fine.
Yeah, to successfully, I mean, like Pat said, not all of them make it.
I get it. No, I completely understand. And then you listed a recidivism rate, and you have in parentheses new felony at 5.9%. Can you just help me understand, number one, how you define recidivism, and number two, how many years you've tracked them before you make this statement?
Yes, sir. I'll be happy to answer that question. So for me, I probably have not used the correct term recidivism as DOC defines recidivism, because I'm tracking the number of arrests.
Okay.
So these are the number of people who were rearrested for new felonies. However, I do not know, were they convicted of those new charges?
it.
Did they get new DOC time?
And so you actually define recidivism the way most of the planet defines recidivism. DOC has a different definition. So, and so you're just tracking the felony arrests go in. If there's a new felony arrest, that goes into your recidivism rate.
Yes, sir, it does. And the 5.9%, that's an average over the last 5 years.
And
That's all of
I get it. So does that include all 945 enrollees or just the 252 successful complete?
No, sir. So if you look at where it said numbers served, 945, Goodwill and Department of Corrections counts numbers served is if we spend an hour with them.
Okay, I understand.
It is not,
So if they never even make it, if you spend the first 60 days with them incarcerated and then they ship out and you never get them
Disappear,
again,
right.
they still count as one of your people?
as someone who was served.
Okay. And so do I multiply the 5.9% times that number or the
No,
252?
sir. So a number that we also tracked is what we call an active number, and those are people who stay in the program. And so we've had 252 complete, and then we still have currently enrolled 258.
Okay.
And so that includes,
That's the number
passing.
you're multiplying times 5.9%?
yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to be, because I wanted to be able to speak about, compare apples to apples, right? We
Yes,
have our friends in Southeast United Way who sent us some data, and we wanted to be able to compare apples to apples. So I appreciate what you do, and,
And I will just tell you over the grants, both sets of grants, because they had a NOFA and then they had an RFP, the data points they've asked for has changed.
really,
And so we have always, I'm a data geek. I actually used to work at the United Way up in North Louisiana. So I was the chief operating officer there. And I'm actually the person that worked alongside Pat to put the program together.
Sure.
When we wrote the grant. And so I like data. Data tells the story. It tells where the impact is. It tells you what you need to know, how to change a community. It tells you what you need. And so we track a lot of this, plus we've got a lot more we track. I gave, based on all the hearings and all what we listened to, I heard what you guys said and what you wanted, and I tried to give you exactly what you wanted and not oversaturate with you, because you've
Okay.
got plenty of that.
no, I appreciate it. Like I said, this is about as granular as I've seen on the subject matter, and I appreciate that. And I mean, I know there are different models around the state, and, your program may be different in kind or degree from others, but how do you said DOC gives you the universe with do you set guidelines on who you will and will not work with, or do you just take whoever DOC refers to you, no matter what the
Yeah,
criminal
when you-
history is, no matter what the current crime
When
is?
we wrote the RFP, when we answered their questions, you had to state your population. We put no restrictions on that. There are programs across the state that eliminated, they didn't want any sex offenders.
I understand. So there are no
None.
restrictions. If DOC recommends them, you will at least
If
go
we have
interview them.
room and we can do it,
We do. Now, what I will do with sex offenders is, because I don't know if they have juvenile victims, I don't know if they have adult victims, I don't know if they're predators or any of that. So when we do get either a DOC referral for a sex offender or a referral from a state prison, I do run it by the sex offender supervisor at the local parole districts to get a history. If they're identified as being a sexual predator, whether against women or children, sometimes I don't take them, because most of us who work with our participants are women. So I have to consider the safety.
I understand.
There have been times that we have taken, well, maybe twice, a sexual predator that had a violent history going all the way back to California. However, what was learned is that with him, some of the sexual crimes that he had in an early age got, I don't know what the proper term is, but, no, not expunged.
seal?
No, reduced. It was this crime, but then they reduced it to a lower crime. And so it wasn't necessarily maybe caught, and I'm maybe not using the right language, when they got to Louisiana, committed another crime. And so they've put ankle monitors on them. So we also put guidelines in place. For instance, if I know someone, whether sexual predator or violent, may have tendencies toward women, we make sure that they meet them only at the parole office, that they don't, if they come to Goodwill, that they are not meeting them behind closed doors, they don't go to their homes. So we put those safety precautions in place. I can say with most of the sex offenders that we have worked with, they have been some of the most successful ones. I have 2 or 3 in particular who went to work for Goodwill as a transitional employee, went there full-time, bought his first home, got married, the young lady the lady that I just spoke about. And so sometimes, I don't know, it's just case by case basis based on what the crime is. But for the most part, we take whomever is sent to us.
Well, thank you. And do any of your clients or the inmates that are released come from parish jails, or do they all come directly from a DOC facility?
All of our participants have to be under DOC supervision, whether they're at a state prison or they're being housed at a parish.
But some of them are housed at local parish
Yes.
prisons, as DOC prisons.
Yes.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Probably those are harder because they're getting less programming, so we have to work harder with those.
That was why I asked the question.
Yeah.
May I add to that? One of the other problems that we have when they come from a local detention center or reentry center is that when we get referrals from Department of Corrections, is that by the time we get the referral, that person has been shipped. And so sometimes it's hard to track where they're at, but DOC is working on that to give us more up-to-date information on once they transferred from a local detention center to a state facility.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. And I think reentry services are incredibly important, and I appreciate some things you said, Ms. Williams, about barriers to. We all want to see recidivism reduced or eliminated, but it's hard to do that when you place barriers in either housing, education, or workforce to people doing the productive things they need to be doing to not reoffend or stay out of the criminal justice system. So that's why I support Ban the Box, and I think we should look at ways to resource programs for reentry that not only eliminate these barriers, but also keep going services that y'all provide, like mental health, substance abuse, behavior disorders, things of that nature. So I thank you for what you do, and I think that's the right path to go. One small question I do have, I'm looking at your handout, and your Goodwill Industry of North Louisiana, and it says parishes served, and one of them it includes Avoyles. Do y'all consider Avoyles Parish in North Louisiana?
So we didn't draw the Goodwill map, the territory map. And so I think Avoyles is actually the Baton Rouge district. And so if we go into their district, we have to get permission. And they did give us permission to work with individuals there.
Just wondering. All right. Thank you very much.
It's a long drive.
Thank you. I'm just curious, the people who come to you, have they availed themselves of programs within DOC? And I'm talking about job training, certifications, those sorts of things typically, or is that something y'all just kind of feel for?
We need to start tracking that better, but I do know that if they're coming from a state facility, oftentimes they do have their GED already. They perhaps have started a certification program, whether it's welding or construction, but have not completed it. So part of our program is to help them to get that secondary credential, whether it's at the local community college or the vocational school. So the Goodwill case managers help file with the FAFSA, the Pell Grants. A lot of the guys come out and they want to do CDLs because they see making six figures. We have to ensure that their decisions are reality-based, because a CDL means most of the time you're driving across state lines. Parole is not going to allow that until they develop that trust with their parole officer. Now, we have done it, and those have been successful, but we want everything to be reality-based.
What I'm drawing from your comment is it would be nicer if they would come to you with the certification than you having to finalize that certification.
So we've actually piloted a program at Washita Correctional Center, and we actually have a full-time staff member at Caddo Correctional Center, actually a person and a half, because we have a full-time and a part-time there, where we do job skill training behind the wall. And so that was to beef up. So it was kind of that warm pass-off to our programs.
All right, I guess I would ask, how important is it, and I'm only looking for your opinion, that when somebody is released on parole or released, that they have some skills that are marketable. I would think that is absolutely a priority. But
It's easier to get them a job, for sure.
Yeah.
We have hundreds of employers we work with that really trust us, because they know that when they have problems with, Joe Schmo, they call Goodwill and say, come fix Joe Schmo, and we go over there and save the day.
Okay.
But yes, it makes them on paper look, but there is right now such a shortage of workers. It's, I don't want to say easy, but it has gotten easier since COVID to get them employed.
Okay, well, it seemed like we ought to incentivize incarcerated individuals, maybe by making that a component of an early release, that you have to have marketable skills, and we have to offer it to you. But anyway, I'm just trying to get your insight on that. Thank
I would
you.
love to have them have more welding, more, what I call a livable wage job skills.
Right.
Because then that, that is petty crime reduced, I think the stat is like 80% goes down 80%.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am.
I just wanted to say thank you to the Goodwill. About a year, maybe a little over a year ago, I had the opportunity to tour their facility, very well put together operation, and I encourage anybody on this panel, on this task force, to go and tour that facility. Thank y'all.
May I make a comment? Also, I have had the privilege of speaking at several of the parole board or pardon board hearings. And because of the reputation that 318 has in the state, often the pardon board will say, as part of their stipulation, is that they have to go into the 318 reentry program and successfully complete it.
Thank you, Lynn and Pat, for making the drive from Shreveport to Baton Rouge today. Appreciate you both being here. And like Mr. Abbott, I've had the privilege of working with you guys in North Louisiana and actually seeing the work that's going on there. I agree with Mr. Lampert. It's great to see some data and actual numbers. I don't want to put you on the spot, but Goodwill was started in the 1900s. What was the original, or what is the mission of Goodwill Industries?
Yeah, it's improving people's lives through the power of work. So we're more than a thrift store. That's our tagline. That's what most people know. They really don't understand the mission behind Goodwill. And it's really about employment, training, and placement, and providing those services to get them their first job, their next job, or a career.
So not charity, but a chance,
But a chance.
to quote Reverend Helms. Can someone off of the street that's not involved in Exit 318 come to Goodwill and receive services for employment and those type of
Yeah, so
training?
we have over 20 different workforce development programs. And so, yes, we have an open placement program that anybody, no matter their risk level, can walk in off the street and get the services they need. What we've done with the Exit 318, though, is really target and increase our population and the services. So we're not able to provide housing. We're not able to provide some of the things we can do through Exit to those individuals. It's really about getting them a job and getting them, on that path, whatever their path looks like.
And do you know right offhand how many people you serve
Last year,
total?
last year we served 2,639.
And I see the number you served through the Exit 318 program was 945.
That's over the time period.
And you actually did not spend all of the
Did
grant
not.
money.
We're very frugal.
Could you have served more individuals?
We have.
You have.
We have.
Okay.
Yeah, COVID, impacted numbers. I wasn't going to spend dollars if we didn't have clients necessarily. We watch our P's and Q's.
So you have the capacity to serve more than
Definitely.
945 people. Thank you. Appreciate what you both do.
But we're also mandated, so like our current contract for Tier 2 is 69 per region per year. That was what we were given by DOC in our contract.
And that was reduced from the previous contract of 100 per contract.
So they capped the number of people
Correct.
that you can serve.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Stevens, Ms. Williams, thank you. Like everybody else, we appreciate you making the 3.5-hour trek the week after Christmas to be with us. I just really want to add my thanks, not just on your testimony, but really reinforcing the fact that effective community incentive grant funded programs actually work. Your rates are impressive. I know you're frugal, by the way. I know United Way misses you in Northwest Louisiana, but I think it just reinforces the fact that through this process, we should not only continue investments in effective programs, we should certainly evaluate those and make sure that they stand the data test. But in fact, we should consider doubling down on top of investing in other measures to actually prevent violent crimes from ever happening in the first place. I just want to thank you for your service and the impressive work that y'all have done at Goodwill. We could, in Southeast Louisiana, could take a few pages out of your playbook.
It's only 4 hours. Actually, to New Orleans, about 6 hours.
All right, do we have any other member comments or questions? Seeing none, I wanted to thank you all again, as the other members have said, for coming and for the work that you all do, and have a safe drive back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, at this time, I don't have any other cards for public comments, and I don't see anyone else looking to speak. So at this time, we will move on. Members, for agenda item number 5, additional testimony and presentations, we were hoping to have someone with Right on Crime with Mr. Payton, and he was unable to be here today, Mr. Jerron Smith. And so we appreciate his willingness, and everything works out with him as well. So we will go ahead and move on to agenda item number 6, which is review of the task force report regarding proposed legislative action and subsequent vote. To begin with, I will just say that this draft report that we put together is, for the most part, taken straight from our previous meetings and what data and information was provided, and what recommendations and proposals have been discussed. I know, as the task force members will see, we have approximately 5 overall recommendations, and as we discussed at some of the past meetings, these recommendations are not as fact-specific as some others. We wanted to keep it broad and to keep it more of a guiding principles or recommendations for the new legislature and the incoming administration to be able to craft those proposals in accordance with these recommendations. And so, in addition, I wanted to bring to your attention, members, the first document that I had included with the public comments was a proposal from United Way of Southeast Louisiana that was sent to the task force. And Mr. Williamson, you are more than welcome to kind of speak to that. The only thing that I would suggest as far as the task force as a whole would be that, similar to Representative Muscarello's proposal from the last meeting regarding the mental health issues, that any specific recommendations or proposals, such as the United Ways and Representative Muscarello's, that we would include those with the report when we send it to the legislature, and when we send it out, that we include those recommendations on the behind, rather than specifically addressing them in the report. But Mr. Williams, if you wanted to speak to that, to the United Way's recommendations.
No, thank you. I think that's fair enough. And I think the first two items that we listed meant to be broad as well are included in the recommendations. From our perspective, we just want to make sure that our position was on record. I do think the last item that we listed kind of speaks to kind of perhaps a bigger opportunity to consider how state agencies work across their various priorities to view their work in the context of violent crime reduction, understanding that there are a variety of drivers, some of which we talked about today, workforce, housing, et cetera. So we just want to make sure we pointed that out and certainly want to be a resource. In fact, that's how many in the public and private sector and local communities work across government entities and nonprofit organizations. So but I think by and large it's included, and so make sure we put that on record. Thank you.
And thank you so much. And yes, and similar to the United Way as well as Goodwill and the other partner agencies and entities that provide these reentry services, I just want to make sure, as we set forth in our task force recommendation, is that we just want to make sure that whatever programs are getting this funding, that they're working and that they are cost effective, and then to really to promote those and try to expand those to the best that we can and with the funds that we have. I think those are substantial goals from this task force, is to improve and expand those programs that are working to get our folks back to work, keep them out of prisons, like kind of DOC's unspoken tagline is, we hope to never see you again, with the thought being, we want you to be back and we want you to be better than you were. So with that, Representative Villio, I'm going to throw it to you for any comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The only thing I wanted to say was, thank you for this work. And also, at the appropriate time, I would move to accept the report.
All right, let's see. So we've got a motion for Representative Villio to accept the report, a second from Mr. Lampert, and then we got Representative Bacala. I'm going to throw it to you.
Well, I would like to potentially see if it fits. If it fits, it does. It doesn't. But in another task force that we sat on last week that has been meeting relative to juvenile information or juvenile issues, one of the things that came out that everybody was in agreement on was the sharing, and I think it's sort of covered in here. I want to make sure it is, that the sharing of juvenile records is very important. DOC called to the attention of that group that their inability to see juvenile records impacts their ability to properly treat incarcerated individuals within DOC. It was brought out that the courts are unable, in some cases, to adequately evaluate what a sentence could be or should be because of the unavailability of juvenile records, and if it's within the jurisdiction in which the crime is committed that they're being sentenced on, that's one issue. But if it happened in another parish, they don't have access. So I think as part of the transparency, we need to make sure that these juvenile records are made available across the spectrum of the criminal justice system to better evaluate a sentence or a treatment process or anything like that. So I think that's important. The second thing that I would like, I brought this up in previous meetings and here today, that I think timely adjudication is important on several levels. We heard today that somebody's waiting on trial, pre-trial, 4 years. I don't think that's as unusual as we think it is, or we certainly don't believe it should be of that nature. And there are national standards which you sent out, thank you, Mr. Chair, And I think we ought to look at one of two things. 39 states at least have adopted standards for the timely prosecution of cases. I think we ought to adopt something or study the adoption of timely adjudications. And I'll just reference it for the record. It's the model standards for state trial courts. It was adopted by the National Center for State Courts. So the states participated in the adoption of these standards, and for felony cases, it would call for 98% adjudication within a year of an indictment or a bill of information. I do think that's very important if we want to see a reduction in crime. And those are my comments.
Thank you, Representative Bacala. And just kind of going to your 2 points, with respect to the juvenile records, I certainly agree with you that we need to make sure that Department of Corrections as well as the courts have access to these juvenile records. I think there's some internal mechanisms that I think we can certainly push in terms of administrative changes that can be made for more information sharing between OJJ and DOC. But also, I think part of our recommendations themselves, I think, address that in terms of increasing transparency in the criminal justice system, not only in the adult court system, but also in the juvenile court system, and making sure that the public and everyone has all of this information so that we can, make better decisions and kind of know what's happening with everything going forward. And then with respect to the timeliness of adjudication, I definitely take your point. I think that's a very important issue. I think some of these recommendations are going to help. Certainly, I think transparency is going to help, being able for the public and lawmakers to kind of get a better idea of how long these cases are taking, where they are, what particular judges are doing on any given day, and just more information about the system, I think, will help that. But also, I think that's something definitely laudable to be continued exploration and thought on that issue. Mr. Payton?
Won't be today. Okay. One quick question, or a couple of quick questions, Mr. Chair. On recommendation number 5, I just want to make sure that correction officers and probation and parole officers are taken into account for this shortage as well. DOC has a tremendous shortage of correctional officers. Corrections is using probation and parole to help staff the prisons, which takes away from their core mission on probation and parole. I know the earlier part of the report mentions revocations for probation and parole, and I think as a former probation and parole officer, as someone that worked in 2017, 2018, and 2019, I don't think revocations were the issue. There were some things that prohibited parole revocations. Those were addressed through DOC. But having the manpower there, having the individuals working the caseloads and not working in the prisons is critical. So staff retention for probation and parole, staff retention for corrections, they're not always included under the umbrella of law enforcement, though they are. So just want to make sure that point covers corrections officers as well, to maintain safety of the officers and to maintain safety of those in the custody of DOC.
Thank you, Mr. Payton. And I think you make an excellent point about our corrections and P&P officers. And I think the recommendation is broad enough to encompass those individuals as well as part of our law enforcement community. And certainly, as we heard about with Orleans and really all across the state with our officer shortage, we have to do all that we can to get more qualified folks in there, get them trained, and get them helping Remy, let's see.
Reiterate, this isn't legislation or proposed legislation, just broad concepts. And I just want to be sure that, we don't forget the public defenders whenever we're talking about increasing resources for recruitment and retention of personnel, because obviously we're always going to be a component of anything we do in the criminal justice system. So I just want to mention that. And of course, the recommendation about the services, I would like to see very robust treatment of mental health, behavior disorders, and substance addiction treatment options.
Thank you, Mr. Starnes. Do we have somebody on this side that had a button pushed? Okay. All right. Do we have any other comments, questions, or remarks by the members about the draft report? I don't see anyone else wishing to speak. So at this time, I think it's proper to take up Representative Villio's motion to adopt and approve the draft report. That we have a second by Mr. Lampert. Does this need a roll call vote? We need a roll call vote. We don't have, yeah. I guess we would say, do we have any opposition to the motion to adopt the draft report? And seeing no opposition, the draft report of the Louisiana Violent Crime Task Force is adopted. As mentioned just a minute ago, we will include the additional recommendations, Representative Muscarello and the United Way's recommendations. We will include those behind the report, as well as the minutes and the agendas and the other pertinent information for when we send that to the legislature. With that, we would move on to agenda item number 7, any other business before the task force? And seeing no hands raised, I'll just take a minute to tell you all I really appreciate all of your time and efforts meeting. I know this was, sometimes they were short notice and people driving in from everywhere, but I appreciate you all giving input, providing data, providing feedback, giving recommendations, and all of the support. And we look forward to the new administration and the new legislature taking these recommendations and running with them. So with that, I will move to adjourn. Representative Villio seconds, no opposition. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.